Hello everyone. It's lovely to, well, at least see your names appearing at rapid session in the list on the right-hand side for my attendees. Pleasure to see some familiar faces. I'm going to ask all of our speakers for today to bravely start their cameras rolling. Excellent. Lovely to see you all too. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for joining today's online workshop. My name is Laura Jones and I'm the Cultural Heritage Preservation Lead here at the V&A. As you know, for the event invitation, today we launch our opening session of our new interactive workshop to discuss what role do you see cultural heritage playing in a post-COVID-19 development landscape. So in this series, we will explore the role of cultural heritage protection and its role to play in building back better as we move towards a developed landscape that could be significantly transformed by the effects of COVID-19. These live stream workshops will be held every fortnight on a Thursday at 4 p.m. GMT over a period of 10 weeks. So that's 5 sessions in total. We're inviting our audience to join this discussion online and contribute questions both beforehand and throughout the interactive session. The workshops will be organic and responsive, aiming to stimulate some debate, generate creative responses to the topics discussed in real time, and as a stimulus to explore both tangible and intangible aspects of cultural heritage protection. Also, we're very pleased to have Chris Ship with us today, a live illustrator who will be capturing today's discussion in real time. The questions, discussion, and outcomes from each session will be shared through these illustrations, and we aim to capture the series journey from the first workshop to the last. So to tell you a little bit about the partners that brought together this series, we are the British Council, the Department of Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, and the Victoria and Albert Museum's Culture in Crisis programme. We've come together as distinct but interconnected voices in the world of heritage protection. We all believe in the importance of collaborative and interdisciplinary working. And we've partnered to create this kind of platform for shared discussion of learning. And now for you guys in the audience, a little bit for your role. We actively encourage you to join this conversation via the chat, not only guiding today's discussion, but also trying to contribute to the shape of the subsequent webinars in this series. We'll be issuing polls during the event to learn a little bit about you and to gauge the audience perspectives on the discussion as it develops. And we're committed to trying to bring a multiplicity of voices to the discussion, to share our thoughts and experiences, but collectively work to better understand the role that cultural heritage protection can play in a post-COVID development landscape. So this episode is really about setting the stage. We're exploring the issues from the perspectives of the organisers before we open the discussion up in later events to speak with more voices from the world of heritage protection and beyond. We'll be using the hashtag Culture in Crisis Conversation so that people can get involved both during and after the event on social media too. So that's a little bit over from me, and I can hand you over to our panelists. And I'll start by putting you all on the spot and asking you to introduce yourselves, your role and background, and why you're a stakeholder in the discussion. And I'm also asking you guys in the chat too. So let us know who you are, where you're joining us from, and why this topic is of interest to you. So first, I'm going to hand over to you, Stephen.
Hello, and hello to everybody. I'm tempted to say, I hope you can hear me, but I'm not sure you can respond, so that's perhaps a waste of time. So welcome from what is an incredibly sunny Perthshire. I'm in the village that boasts the Western Europe's best and biggest collection of Pictish sculptures, so I'm sure that locates me for you all. So the brief is to give a bit of context, background, and the stake in this discussion. So my role is Head of Arts and Society at British Council. What that essentially means is arts and broadly cultural responses where they play a part in global issues, particularly our contribution to creative economies, to culture and development. And the biggest single project is the UK Cultural Protection Fund, which we deliver in partnership with DCMS, and a little more of that later. My background is that sort of well-trodden path for people who find themselves pontificating on cultural heritage and cultural protection. I started out as an actor, leaving education too early and with too little of it. The coolest place in the town I grew up was a community theatre, so therefore my ambition was just to spend all day in a theatre if I could. I was fortunate enough to become a published playwright and theatre director, and found myself as a director of a theatre in Scotland, and was sort of fed up with spending all my day in theatre and with people who chose to be in theatres. So I went outdoors, directing and producing festivals, taking art to where people were and celebrating place. And latterly that meant directing Edinburgh Mellor as part of Festivals Edinburgh. And by an extraordinary and very happy set of circumstances, I then was given what turned out to be an extraordinary opportunity to join the British Council in the Middle East as Director of Arts, Middle East, North Africa in 2011. So in 2011, I was in Cairo with uprisings in Libya and Tunisia, Bahrain, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, an extraordinary time, and a time where there was a certainty that the world would be a different place. It also meant that the work that we were doing was about connection with artists and activists who were at the forefront of some of those movements, a very different kind of a response to arts for British Council. It also meant that we were working very much in what was seen from a kind of Western perspective as the development space. So culture broadly in international development. And it was that connection that, as in 2015, the Cultural Protection Fund was started up, led to the connection with British Council, with British government, DCMS, working with us, not specifically for our knowledge of heritage, but for our knowledge of cultural responses in that development space. And that is largely what brings me to the conversation, the Cultural Protection Fund, which has been running since 2015. And I suppose my final two reflections would be that you get a particular perspective, I think, when you come from outside. So in my case, from a background more in festivals and theatre to heritage. And the things that have really struck me over the last 5 years is the value different communities and different places give to heritage, and the potential, largely it feels untapped, to gain value from heritage, to valorize it. And finally, I would just say, really looking forward to how this series develops and bringing in a sort of range of international and diverse voices, I think. So thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Stephen. I'll pass you over to Harriet now.
Sorry, I always do that. I'm still trying to get to grips with where my unmute button is. Hello, everybody. It is an absolute pleasure to be part of this series. And so many thanks to Laura and also to Stephen at the British Council. So I am the head of cultural protection at DCMS. So what that means is that I look for ways that we can integrate the importance of cultural heritage protection across a number of different areas. So look at where the intersection comes with protecting cultural heritage and the environment, looking at the development space, humanitarian action, and this is situated within the international development context. So I'm really pleased to take this opportunity to bring people in from across different sectors, because I think it's so important to try to break down silos and break down particular paths and particular processes that align with one particular sector. So I'm really interested in how we can, for example, draw in what the international development space is doing, or humanitarian space, and learn from each other and have conversations about where and how we can integrate cultural heritage protection there. A bit about my background, I won't bore you with it for too long. So I have been in my role at DCMS for, gosh, about 6 months, a year, something like that. And previously I worked on research projects that looked at minority rights and the freedom of religion and belief. So I did a lot of field work out in South Asia, and then I headed up a research project called the Commonwealth Initiative on the Freedom of Religion and Belief at the University of Birmingham. And that was looking at the way in which culture and religious identity intersected, and then what was there to protect it. So for example, if international human rights law wasn't the best way through which to protect an individual's identity in the sense of self, how could we do that? How could we look for bottom-up or local approaches? So it's with that lens I come into my role here, and you know, again, that is very much supported by the work that I do in terms of the Cultural Protection Fund as well. So that's me.
Brilliant, thank you so much, Harriet. And last but not least, I'll pass you to Vernon.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Vernon Rapley. I'm the Director of Cultural Heritage Protection and Security here at the Victoria and Albert Museum. And I'm talking to you from the museum. So I'm one of the few people who's allowed to come to the museum now. So I show off by putting a nice background on whenever I can. And I'm in the National Art Library, which is one of my favourite rooms. And when you've got it to yourself, it's a nice place to talk to people, broadcast and think as well, I think. So my role at the V&A is unusual. I think I'm probably the only person with my job title, possibly in the world, but certainly in the UK. And I look after the Culture in Crisis programme, primarily that Laura works with me on. And you can find lots of details on this on the V&A website. So there's the beginning of the shameless plug there. Please go to look for Culture in Crisis on the V&A website if you haven't visited it, and you'll find lots about the programme, which will prevent me from or avoid the need for me to explain it in too much detail. I come, and as Stephen does, maybe from a slightly unusual background into this area. I've been at the V&A now for 10 years, but I still consider myself to be the new boy here. I spent 24 years at Scotland Yard, service police officer, and retired as the head of Scotland Yard's Art and Antiquities Unit, or Art and Antiques Unit, where I looked after all sort of aspects of cultural heritage crime, represented the UK in working groups around the world on Interpol groups protecting heritage in Iraq and Afghanistan, South America, Eastern Europe, as well as working on traditional art theft and fakes and forgeries and things like that. So I come to this area with a slightly different perspective, and really been very lucky to be supported by successive directors of the Victoria and Albert Museum who have wanted to step up and be involved in this conversation. And so often I think other museums are seen as the voice of cultural heritage protection, and I think we're incredibly privileged to be able to represent museums in the way that we can at the Victoria and Albert Museum by taking a different look at culture and what it is, and not dealing with it just as antiquities, but looking at it in its much broader context. It's an intangible and tangible heritage in all of its forms, and that has been a fascinating journey for me to engage on with Laura and the rest of the V&A. I think what I'm most looking forward to with this conversation is listening, is hearing the thoughts. We are really keen to encourage young people to become involved in this conversation. There are too many grey and 50-year-old men involved in this, and we would really love for word to get out and for there to be a younger and diverse audience, so that we can really hear and listen to the messages that are coming forward, so that we can all adapt what we're doing as we come out of this. And I think the other thing I'd like to say is I see COVID as an opportunity to change and to do things differently, not just in the way we work, but in our attitudes and the way that we deal with cultural heritage protection globally. So thank you, Laura.
Brilliant, lovely. Well, it's been great to hear a little bit about your background and your work from the panelists, but also to start seeing people sharing their information in the chat. Already I can see we've got some great international conduits joining us, so that's lovely. And as I said, I'm here to sort of serve the role of the attendees here. I'm going to pick out questions from the chat and try to steer this conversation within the group. But whilst you all get warmed up, I'm going to start with a starter for 10 being emailed into us, and I think it probably sets quite a nice stage for the discussion, and it's quite a serious one. So for the vast majority of us, COVID-19 has been an experience incomparable with any other. But to what extent can we look back on previous learning through comparable crises such as conflict, environmental disaster, or economic downturns and apply that learning to the situation today? So I'm afraid I'm not starting you off with an easy one there, but just to get the ball rolling, great to start hearing your views on that one. And again, contributions in the chat, most welcome.
Shall I start with that? Stephen, do you want to start?
Well volunteered, Vernon.
I'll pick up from something you were. So, I mean, this is an odd answer in a way to that question, but one of the things I'd pick up is the sense of opportunity that Vernon mentioned. That in my kind of introduction, I was talking about the experience of being in Egypt in 2011, and there was a very obvious sense of crisis and conflict around, but equally the sense of we are about to create a new world. Everything will be different from this point forward. And I was new to the organization then as well, and there were sort of gnarled old hands around me who sort of said, no, things here they will go back to as they were. I couldn't believe it because I was surrounded by so much kind of incredible energy and determination for change. And one of the things that occurs to me from that experience is there is also that huge opportunity at the moment, the opportunity to ensure that it's not about returning to things that weren't working before, but to look at everything in a slightly different way. And again, I mean, I think there is an opportunity for heritage as well, to just as with everything else, to look at, for me, one thing is the sort of balance between systems and structures, and the experience of being in the Middle East again is you know, it readdresses your balance between people and what people do and what systems and structures do. Sometimes, particularly in Europe, we're over-convinced that things are done through systems and structures. And actually, I think it's much more important to look at all the ways we operate, how we relate to each other, the decisions we make, how we plan for the future, and ensure that there's ultimately an element of humanity in them. And that as we look at the systems, that some of which have proved to be not terribly resilient in the current crisis, then we look at new systems that involve people much more, that are much more inclusive, that are much more participatory, and give much more opportunity to reflect personality and humanity. So that's probably not the response you were kind of expecting, but I think that sort of opportunity not to just paper over and go back is a huge one and a very exciting one.
Hi, can I actually just ask a question off that, Stephen? So what do you see the digital space as being able to open up those opportunities and facilitate those opportunities more? What role do you think that has to play in order to enact what you've just spoken about?
I think one element that often gets lost with it is that there is the potential to be far more connected, and so we should get much more obvious advantage for that. For example, in the area of cultural protection and cultural heritage, it should be far easier to ensure that there is a sort of coordination in what we do, that places are not such a, you know, aren't a mystery anymore. It isn't the case that you require access through government to government agency. It's much easier to talk to counterparts directly, and I think there's much more advantage that can come from that. That the ability to sort of connect very directly and ensure that we're not guided so much by where money can go or political interest is, but what it is important to do, and that being judged by sort of sharing information. A couple of other things. One that occurs is that also we should be able to look at digital as a way of solving some of those problems we know exists. I mean, for example, where the eccentricities of our economic model, where mass tourism, for example, is seen as the best way of supporting heritage work, but is at the same time what puts it at risk through things like virtual tourism, the sharing of more sustainable ways forward. We, ought to be able to reconstruct things so that we can sort of counter some of those effects. Yeah, I'll stop there, because I could go on, and I probably will otherwise.
If I can, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things that Stephen has said, and one of them was about how everything can be different, and you said everything will be different, and I think that's very true. I think if we look back at the experiences of other, let's call crises or disasters, things have normally gone back after a period of time. If you look at the terrorist attack in London, it had a huge impact upon people visiting cultural venues for a short period of time, but then it returned and business was at normal. And of course, these sort of conflicts and crises around the world have caused an interruption. And I think what we need to do here, I think we really have this opportunity that to make things different and to look at how we can, as it says, build back better, explore some of the projects that are taking place, and look at whether the technology that Stephen's now discussing can be utilised to make these projects more effective. We know we're going to have less money, almost certainly. Everyone will have less money, so we need to spend it in a wiser way. And I think, to pick up on something else that Stephen said, it was about coordination. And again, not to shamelessly plug it, but the V&A introduced the Culture in Crisis portal a while ago, bringing together all of the projects from around the world so that people can see what is going on and understand. And I think this is part of this open access to this sort of information that can ask people to explore different ways of working and to benefit from the experiences of others, to share. Sometimes, I think, when we first looked at creating that portal, we interviewed two people who were running projects almost side by side in a country, neither of which were working together in any way, shape or form. And the idea of this portal was to bring this together and to allow this coordination so that you can get greater value from the work that you're putting into that area. And so I think also I find it, when we look at projects and where funding is going, so often it's about flying people from the US or flying people from the UK to these countries to do the training. And of course, that face-to-face contact is really important. But now, using technology, we all know that it's possible to do things in a digital way. We can cut the carbon footprint. We can cut the controversy, really, of some of this travel and make some of these projects deliver more at the front where it needs to be, rather than the expense going into the back end. So I think my desire from this is that we absolutely capture this crisis and make something different of it, not just try and build back as we did before, but we genuinely build back better. We create something new. We look at things long term in a completely different way so that we can change things for the better.
Brilliant, thank you. The chat is going wild. I'm so happy to see so many exciting and interesting people contributing to the discussion already. I'm going to do my absolute best to try and pick some of these out and formulate a bit of a discussion around them here. Please do rest assured, if we don't get to things in this session, like we said at the outset, we're looking to try and generate further discussions. So it might be that we pull something out today, but look at it in much more detail in a later date. And with that in mind, I'm going to pop to the next question, which has been coming up a little in the chat here, which is to do with the role of heritage in recovery. And specifically, I'll just pick out Rosanna Lewis's question here, which is that in the recovery of societies and economies around the world, how do we ensure that investment and the valuing of culture and heritage is part of the solution? How do we avoid slipping backwards with heritage protection and community engagement? And I'm going to pick on Vernon to start here, just because you finished off. and he's on mute, so I'm going to now pick on Stephen whilst he fixes that one.
That was a clever trick of Vernon's. I'm trying to remember that one. So I think, yeah, the challenge is there to invest differently. And Vernon was saying there, you know, let's face the fact there will be less money, and that less money will prove to be lamentably inadequate if we're trying to invest it in all the same ways. So we need to look at structures that we invest in that are different. And I think there's a need, therefore, to be looking at things that are sustainable, and to be looking at, rather than creating new structures that are going to be greedy and hungry themselves, or necessarily continue with structures that have proved greedy in the past, to look at where through engagement in culture you can support and cultural heritage, where you can support things that are themselves giving very obvious value locally. I think this is going to be a very odd description of this, but through one of our projects that works quite intensely in Colombia and Kenya, then through conversations in them, you get to see heritage understood in a very different way. Heritage seen very much as a kind of a living heritage, and, you know, defined partly by people's own living experience at the time. And you therefore look to not invest in a system which is removing heritage from people, putting it in a box. It was a fascinating, we all subscribed, there's that sort of, excuse me for quoting George Clooney, but in the monastery, in the Monuments Men, there was quite a kind of lovely quote about just ash floating. The idea that you can kill a generation of people, but if you destroy their achievements and their culture, then all they are is just ash floating. That's a concept we can subscribe to very easily. It was interesting in the conversation in Colombia that people were associating the same thing with, for example, in that case, seeds being taken away and taken out of daily exchange for their protection. So there were elements of their living culture that were being protected, but in that very protection, they were being robbed of it. I think there is something in that about looking at how heritage is contributing to the now and to the future, and looking at the investment that you make with that in mind. How is it giving value to the people closest to it now and in the future?
My go to forget to unmute. Anything that you'd like to add there, Harriet, or should we hop on? I'm keen to keep up with the questions.
Sorry, no, I don't have anything to add there. I'm just, again, looking through the questions as well. There are some fantastic questions here. But I just wanted, actually, I do want to say something very quick on the concept of well-being. So I was out in Lebanon in February with the Praxis Project.
Yeah, I believe we're in on the chat. I've seen a couple of names pop up there.
Yeah, so Stuart, I think, hi Stuart, is on here. And it was an absolutely fascinating discussion. And this is going slightly off topic, and I apologise, and you know, we can get back on track in a minute. But it was about how we can integrate the Sustainable Development Goals more. And of course, within that is well-being. And I guess that throws up a number of different questions over the utility of using these measurement frameworks, particularly at a very localized project level in terms of reporting on projects, in terms of understanding how what you're doing fits into the SDGs. But it would be an interesting point to hear more about from those who are participating, about the way in which we can connect it more to the SDGs and therefore to wellbeing.
Lovely. Vernon, do you have anything to add to that?
I just wanted to come back really about the idea of a greater engagement with communities that Stephen was talking about, and you know, this reduction in money that seems inevitable will lead to reprioritization, but I think it's really important that when that process takes place, we look at ways that local communities are reprioritizing the projects that they need. And also something that has sort of troubled me for quite a long time is that rarely is money available for a community that says, I need this. Usually the money is developed because of a particular interest or need, and then potential recipients of that fund go to the local community and say, would this help? And I think it would be a great opportunity here again now to really refocus our efforts on delivering what local people think is important, and the way that they want their heritage, whatever form that may take, protected and preserved.
And if I could just come in on that, it's, I think, really important as well in terms of utilising all of our local networks and connections too. So again, it kind of takes it back to the beginning, where I was kind of, what I want to do is look at the humanitarian networks that exist. And Peter, I noticed that you've just put something on chat about that, but also the development networks that exist. What can we tap into to ensure that it is part of a broader conversation? The importance of cultural heritage protection is recognised.
So what is the way to do this? I mean, I've had a few questions come in prior to the webinar that really address this idea of better communicating with communities on the ground. And often projects are done in tandem or in collaboration with different groups in different places. And we can sometimes forget that in this period of isolation that those things be continuing and there are new issues to address. And I want to come to this maybe slightly later, but the compounding issues of COVID. This isn't just COVID for a lot of people, it's another wave, another issue to bound onto another existing problem. And are we able to be responsive to the needs of people on the ground? Now, perhaps I can reach out to you, Stephen, to talk maybe about the British Council and how you're keeping in touch with people on the ground, or more broadly, what we feel the role of conveners or organisers is in making sure we're really hearing from the people that can best tell us about the heritage and the issues that are currently taking place.
Sorry, I realised I was on mute. Yeah, for me, one of the things that's been fascinating in starting up the Cultural Protection Fund back in 2016, then so an important part of the model was looking to support work that, so you needed a partner in the country, you needed to be connecting with work that would be based in that country for various reasons. And that started to kind of open up different ways of working around heritage. And there was a sort of a pilot project that is going on currently in Kenya, Colombia, and Vietnam. And I think this in part goes towards answering the question that it was really interesting that the first thing I think you needed to do in developing projects in those countries is be willing to start at the very beginning and start with what was understood to be heritage, and not going in with an assumption that what you brought with you as an understanding of heritage was going to be shared in the conversations you had. For example, if we were, and we did a good deal of kind of research and getting feedback in advance, and none of that led us to thinking that we would be looking at things like traditional medicines, seeds, gongs in Vietnam, or a multiplicity of other things that we are looking at. So there was first that sense of being open to what is valued by people, and that not needing to have anything to do with the values that you then bring into that discussion. And then also secondly, in looking at the terminology terminology and understanding. And just one little illustration around that is that in sort of, you do these things and you're required to look at what's the impact, what are you going to use to demonstrate the impact. And, very clever people coming up with a whole sort of matrix of things. One of them, as already mentioned, was about well-being. There's a really fascinating set of discussions that then came with some indigenous communities we were working with in Colombia about the difficulty with that concept, because to an extent well-being requires you to look at how you are as an individual divorced from that around you. How are you feeling when the way they were looking at themselves and cultural heritage was as, part of a whole system that is there. So separating themselves as individuals and what was their well-being was a very unuseful and difficult sort of matrix to use. So, again, there's that sort of need to go in with a genuine commitment to sort of co-creation, to discovery, and then feeding the way forward from that learning and discovery. I think that sort of approach for me has become the most important thing that we've learned from that project.
Anyone else to unmute themselves for that, or I will go on? I'll tell you what, I'm desperate to understand a little bit more about what Chris is creating in this corner. It's looking brilliant. I'm personally slightly offended that I don't believe my face has made the cut, but maybe we could zoom in and see what Chris has managed to produce for us so far from all your valuable contributions. Chris, could I pass it to you? Brilliant. That looks wonderful. So just to look through here, I'm going to have to do this on the hoof now because it's become legible now that I've made it slightly larger. So we've got the kind of centered around the idea of sustainable development goals, which I think is something that's come up in quite a lot of the questions to the side. The opportunity of recreating systems and structures with a very threatening looking virus body below it. And I'm sure the conservationists in the chat are probably very upset about what's happening to that ionic column. Something that spurred a little question for me in the top there is virtual tourism, and perhaps we can talk a little bit about the role of digital going forwards. I know it's come up slightly, both in what you've been contributing as panelists, but in the questions. Are there some obvious easy wins here for us? What should we be moving towards, and how can we be using digital world a little bit better? And I'll leave this up on the screen for 2 minutes more just to see, so we can take a look. I'll pass it over to you, Harriet.
Sorry, I'm muted. Right, I'm back. No, it's a really good question, and I think actually that given that this is quite an organic series of events, I think it would be interesting to focus more on that in a specific event. So we can integrate, the idea of virtual tourism. What does it actually mean in practice? Because it's a great idea, but actually, what are the drawbacks of it? What are the benefits of it? How could we have it as a complementary way of experiencing place, in addition to actually being able to experience a place? So I'm quite keen that we could, not to pass the buck at all, but I'm really keen that we could discuss this in more detail in future sessions. But I mean, I know that the Cultural Protection Fund, for example, has been pivoting its programs to integrate digital content more. And I don't know if, Steve, you could talk more about that.
Sorry, I keep trying to get myself on mute in the belief that I'll then be asked fewer questions. Yeah, I mean, in the sort of that word pivot seems to be the word of the moment, and in the case of sort of working with the projects that are underway at the moment, then that's obviously at a sort of quite an early stage. But I think a lot of the interest is around that sort of virtual tourism and the experience you can give of heritage and the value people have of it. sometimes in a way that you can digitally or online that you couldn't possibly live. For example, there's a project I was lucky enough to visit in September where it was restoring restoring old buildings in Palestine, and many of them were inaccessible, and you would want them to be inaccessible in that people were living in them and around them. And sort of one idea that has come up and is starting to be worked on is the people who are living in and around them starting to introduce with a greater sense of what those buildings and structures mean to them beyond sheltering them and sheltering their animals, introducing online not just the opportunity for people to see them, but for people to experience what it is to live with them. And I think in the end, you could do that in such a way where you get a much richer interaction with heritage than you would if you did a guided tour, where in that case, somebody would point and you would have to crane your neck and look through a gap in the wall to see it. And then you'll be looking past somebody's washing and feeling that you were a bit sort of a peeping Tom, as it were. So, you know, I think some of the ways that have come, just as sort of with everybody's lives, some of the things that we've been required to do because of this lockdown experience have actually kind of encouraged forms that work better than what was happening before, if you like. I hope that answers your question, Harriet, and I'm definitely going back on mute now.
Yeah, no, I just want to pick up on a couple of things that are coming up in the chat, which is actually reflecting the not concerns that I have about, you know, this fated move into a digital space, but I think we really do need to contextualize it and look at the challenges that, you know, moving into a digital world can present. So, for example, you know, just Duncan on the chat here, it's absolutely critical that we shouldn't undervalue the real and physical as a way of getting in touch with the past. And again, context is absolutely key here, you know, not to mention the potential inequalities in digital access. And then, of course, this moves us into different approaches as well. So, for example, could we learn from programs that use mobile technology, so apps on mobiles? You know, I know that the Global Heritage Fund is looking at the way in which this could work. And so given that, you know, more people have mobile phones, is that something that we could integrate into how we do new programs or projects? And again, I know that, for example, Oxfam, you know, all the development agencies do this. How can we learn through what they're doing and do it in such a way which is equitable whilst also being context dependent?
I think the other thing for me about is that it's sustainable and manageable in the future as well. The consequences of things like a digital experience, which can drive and should drive real visits, but is that then manageable within that community as it goes forward, or does that in fact endanger the heritage or the community more? So I think, as you said at the beginning, Harriet, this is a fascinating subject and one which probably deserves its own webinar, but I think it's fraught with risks as well as opportunities.
Excellent. I'm probably doing a terrible job of trunking a lot of the questions coming in to try and find something that's a bit overarching here, and to be reassuring everyone that we're taking all of the chat from this session and trying to use it to form our next sessions and trying to bring in speakers as well. So if you do have a passion, which is clear that a lot of you do for the chat about a certain area, please do feel free to expand on your questions by emailing us directly at cultureandcrisis@vam.ac.uk. That's also going to be on the illustration as well, so I'll make sure that's nice and big towards the end. So again, what's coming up again in chat is this idea of recurring and compounding issues faced by COVID. It's just one more in a long line. And the opportunities that digital present are in a way limited for a lot of people due to the digital divide. What we're also looking at here is the idea of sort of the potential benefit of a reduction in tourism to some sites. So feel free to pick up on any of these ideas as I go through. And on another question which has come in, which is around economic value and craft, things are linking here to living culture that could provide ability to create small economic development opportunities, centering heritage as a mode for economic development. Anyone want to pick up on any of the ideas that have been thrown there?
Sorry, I didn't catch the names and blocks go fast so quickly. It's
I know.
But there was in one comment about the isolation of communities and you know what that means going forward. And I think there's a real interesting discussion, I think, to be had at the role of heritage in the sort of negotiation between the local and the global, and particularly you know, post-COVID, because you know, that sort of sense that I was talking about earlier of looking at the value of heritage more, if we can, from the point of view of communities who live closest to it, have a sense of ownership to it, etc. I think it's really important to make sure that we're looking at ways of, with that potential connectivity, negotiating the global as well. So the global isn't a threat to that sense of kind of identity, belonging, ownership, and a very local sense of value. Rather, there is the opportunity to connect more, to explain more, to put into context that sort of local understanding. So the two are not seen as being rival concepts. I think heritage, cultural heritage, is uniquely well placed to be doing some of that, to make sure what could be divisive isn't, and rather provides a bridge from community to community and culture to culture.
Lovely. We've got sort of 10 minutes left, so I'm going to lead on to another question here, which is picking up on the idea of, again, returning to communities on the ground and people living through the crisis. This question is from Catherine Leonard at INTO, the International National Trust Organisation. It says, with many of our overseas delivery partners facing an existential crisis, how can we best enable them to recover, rebuild and flourish? How do we ensure that they are still there post-COVID, doing their important work in protecting heritage, supporting communities that they work with, providing livelihoods and ensuring well-being? So everything really there, the cultural, the humanitarian work, to the immediate needs, to the long-term recovery. Pass you to Vernon there.
You broke up a little bit there, actually, Laura. I didn't hear all of that. I don't think. I think I got the gist of it. And I think actually I come back to that idea of doing things differently, and looking at. I've seen some of the suggestions coming up here about how you work with the digital divide and what other options are available, and I think this is what this whole series is about. Actually, is to explore these possibilities that there might be. To do things differently, to ensure that we are still working very much to the needs of the community, who look after, value and cherish this this heritage, and those that are on the ground or need to be on the ground to support that work. But I do think it's about looking at how those things can be done differently. That's the key, and what I'd like to explore more in these webinars.
Anyone else for that one?
It's not specifically picking up that one, but it is picking up another point, if you imagine, and it gives me an opportunity to put Harriet on the spot in the way that she put me on the spot over digital. There's a lovely, interesting question from Charlotte Joy about influencing policy and DFID and FCO particularly, and I think there's a kind of interesting opportunity there, and you know, Harriet and DCMS being part of this, and the work that we've done together. I note that going back to that sort of time in the Middle East, I spent kind of a certain amount of time speaking about the value of culture more broadly in some of the conversations and discussions going on. And from a policy point of view, that, you know, that was a very difficult thing for people to take on very clearly. It feels to me that conversations about cultural heritage are not so difficult for policymakers, for government to take on. And in a way, the Cultural Protection Fund is part evidence of that. I just wonder what Harriet would see as the opportunity in that policy space, DFID and FCO particularly mentioned.
Thanks, Stephen, for that one. It's a very good question, and I think that's been one of the big benefits of the Cultural Protection Fund, and also the way in which we at DCMS can work in cultural heritage protection. You know, we're not tied to a specific development agenda or a foreign policy agenda, which I think gives flexibility to the work that we can do in cultural heritage and the way that we can look to integrate it within different departments as a matter of course. So it becomes part of the conversation when you're looking at community work, development work, conflict work. You know, how does cultural heritage protection become part of the conversation, for example, on prevention? It's about identity. So how can we bring that in? So what I do a lot of is that cross-government work, so work with different departments, and also there have been some mentions across the chat as well about how we work in lockstep with other international organisations as well, and states, and that is again what I try to do with the work that we do on cultural heritage. So I hope that answers your question a little bit, and I see, you know, where we're going with the upcoming merger of the Foreign Office and the Department for International Development is a real positive to integrate cultural heritage protection more. And just one more thing, you see it as it comes up in unexpected places as well, where someone says, oh, you know, there's a monument over here, or there's something going on over here, and they don't realise that actually if they look at the work of the Cultural Protection Fund, or more broadly the work that we are developing on embedding cultural heritage, they can find more answers there, and they can look at ways of new programming and new working.
Excellent. So the time's running down. I think I'm going to go for one more question, because I think we can still get some more information out of these guys. This concept that we've been looking at throughout the chat, and it's been reoccurring a few times here, and I'm going to use Rashad Salim's question from Safina Project, which is that through our work we aim to shift the perspective of cultural heritage from preserving the past to engaging with the present, looking at the heritage in community. For example, craft practices, local trading networks, ecological heritage, and its relation to cultural heritage. We're working with local partners and civil society to identify ways that cultural heritage can become a source of solutions for a basket of issues that need to be addressed, including creating jobs, tackling environmental issues, and others. What are your thoughts on this, and how can our institutions support and catalyse such engagements? And I'm going to spread that one out to the chat as well. How do you think that your institution, however you're affiliated or through your own work, could contribute to solving some of the problems highlighted in that question there? And I'll kick off. Who went last? Stephen, you're looking very distracted. I'll go for you.
Thank you. So I think the challenge to find kind of new ways that ensure direct involvement, that kind of direct benefit is coming to communities through heritage work is vital. I mean, we've come across it almost sort of, it came to us with the model of the Cultural Protection Fund almost accidentally, insofar as one of the ways you're required to look at official development assistance benefit is through the value it is creating locally, and the easiest way of starting to evidence that is to be, to use a kind of M&E type word, baseline that with the local community. So find out how much local communities want the work done, see themselves being involved in it, see benefit as coming from it. So, you know, therefore it kind of privileges those things in the work you do. And what I notice is that's been a huge benefit, and sometimes appeared as a very different way of working. And it's a way of working that I'm pleased to say we as an organisation, I think, are entirely committed to taking forward, and taking forward not just with overseas work, but with similar work that's happening in the UK. There's an interesting project we've got involved in with diaspora communities and young people in Manchester and Glasgow, particularly finding value from their South Asian diaspora communities, finding value through their heritage in the context of Manchester and Glasgow as well. I think it's vital.
Harriet or Vernon?
I've just seen appear on the right hand side here Corey Wegener's comment as well about their really important work on first aid for cultural heritage and how they've managed to sustain these projects throughout. I think this would be fascinating to understand more about whether they've had to do things differently, what they've had to do things differently to sustain that sort of work, because this is one of the first people I've seen who've actually managed and can declare that they've kept this work going. So, I mean, obviously it's essential work, and it's wonderful to hear that. And I think it would be great to explore that further if that's possible. Sorry, that's completely off topic, but it came up there and I couldn't avoid it.
No, that's what we're here to do. This session is all about getting these questions out, and unfortunately we've not had enough time to get to the huge plethora of questions and really engaging topics that have come through on the chat. I'm going to swap back to showing the work that Chris has been doing just over in this corner whilst we're all at it. And as I do that, I'm just going to wrap the session up for today and tell you a little bit about what's coming next as well. So here we go. Lovely. I hope you can all see that now. So over the coming weeks, we're going to work to integrate a lot of the feedback from our audience into the overall direction of this conversation. After this and before the next, we really encourage you to get in touch and using the hashtag #CultureInCrisisConversation, or by emailing us directly at cultureincrisis@vn.ac.uk to share your thoughts and ideas. And as much length you can type, because I know the chat can get a bit tricky. Get in touch if you'd like to be on the panel or contribute some of your experiences. We're really keen and interested in trying to work with a young audience. In this case, we're really pushing the boat. We're trying to get people under 25. So if you are one of those people and you'd like to come and share some of your thoughts about the future of heritage protection post-COVID, or indeed, I can see a lot of academics and universities represented in the chat, so please reach out to your students if they're still in contact, and hopefully we can bring some of them in to share their views. Over the next few weeks, we'll discuss and explore some of these themes that have developed from the conversation today and add some more, which we haven't touched on yet. So I'd just like to say a huge thanks to our speakers for kicking off the series with a variety of interesting ideas and comments, and to thank you in the audience for what I really didn't expect, a huge deluge of comments and questions from you all. So I'm really grateful for that. This is a learning curve for all of us, and I think the more information we can share with each other, the better. And it's also been great to see a few of you reconnecting on the chat as well. I look forward to seeing some of these themes re-emerge in coming episodes, and we're going to return on the 9th of June to continue the discussion. We hope you'll all join us again there. The information on the next session will be issued by the end of the week on Eventbrite, and all of you who have registered to attend will receive another email about the information for the next session. So thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to get involved in the discussion. We're here to hear your views. Thank you all for taking part and sticking with us to the very end there. Take care and have a great rest of your week. See you all very soon.